Welcome back to today's programme on meat consumption and climate change in the media. In early 2009, a number of news agencies reported on a freshly released study by Dutch scientists called Climate Benefits of Changing Diet. One article presented the research as follows.
At the Copenhagen Climate Congress, Elke Steffest of the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency presented additional evidence that a vegetarian diet, or one at least that radically reduces meat consumption, can have massive climate change mitigation benefits. The gist of Steffest's presentation was that an area the size of Russia and Canada combined could be freed from use as pasture or cropland used to grow animal feed, if people switched from current levels of meat consumption common in Europe and the United States to a diet based on plant-based protein.
If this transition of dietary norms was started in 2010 and completed by 2030, and that pasture and cropland was allowed to regrow as forest, it would soak up such large amounts of CO2 that in combination with the resultant reduction of methane emissions due to the animals themselves, the cost of climate change mitigation would drop by 70% by 2050, as compared to a business as usual, or maybe diet as usual would be better, scenario.
The solution to global warming boils down to lifestyle changes. The media points out that the one lifestyle change we may otherwise overlook, our diet, is vital. Originally titled Greenhouse Hamburger, the article, How Meat Contributes to Global Warming, was printed in Scientific American on February 4, 2009. It explained how beef production has a surprising environmental cost of releasing massive volumes of greenhouse gases. The author, Dr. Nathan Fiala, ended his compelling case by offering the following solution.
What can be done? Improving waste management and farming practices would certainly reduce the carbon footprint of beef production. Methane capturing systems, for instance, can put cow's waste to use in generating electricity, but those systems remain too costly to be commercially viable. Individuals too can reduce the effects of food production on planetary climate. To some degree, after all, our diets are a choice. By choosing more wisely, we can make a difference. Eating locally produced food, for instance, can reduce the need for transport, though food inefficiently shipped in small batches on trucks from nearby farms can turn out to save surprisingly little in greenhouse emissions. And in the US and the rest of the developed world, people could eat less meat, particularly beef. The graphics on the following pages quantify the links between beef production and greenhouse gases in sobering detail.
The article in its online form is referring to a slideshow that demonstrates statistical information such as the driving mileage equivalent of raising plant versus animal foods, a bar graph showing plainly that livestock is among the top 2 causes of greenhouse gas emissions, and the specific sources of emissions from beef production. The article then concludes.
The take-home lesson is clear. We ought to give careful thought to diet and its consequences for the planet if we are serious about limiting the emissions of greenhouse gases.
Journalists have dug out the truth based on scientific research that reducing meat rather than reducing transportation would do more for the climate. The following is an excerpt from a report by CNN broadcast on March 17, 2008.
Food production responsible for much of greenhouse gas emissions. According to the FAO, the food and agricultural sector is responsible for more than 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, with by far the most important aspect of that sector's environmental impact, it says, lying in the initial production process, not in transportation. Meat and methane. Climate killers? There is, of course, one other major source of greenhouse gas emissions in the food chain: meat. Meat and dairy represent 50% of total food-related impacts, according to the Climate Action Programme. And in terms of the fossil fuel bill meat runs up, For that family of 4 who is using up 930 gallons of fossil fuel a year on food, 265 gallons of it goes towards putting meat on their table. Going vegetarian or vegan, therefore, is being increasingly suggested as one of the best ways to slash our carbon contributions.
While to most of us, animal farms are not something we see or even think of day to day, journalists remind us of their presence and the incredible hazards of pollution they are responsible for. As journalist Mark Bittman summed up in the New York Times,
if price spikes don't change eating habits, perhaps the combination of deforestation, pollution, climate change, starvation, heart disease, and animal cruelty will gradually encourage the simple daily act of eating more plants and fewer animals.
When it comes to meat and the environment, the voices in the media are coming together in unison that we won't be able to save the planet without shifting to being vegetarian.
Jim Ottavalli is a senior writer for E, the environmental magazine, and a frequent contributor to Foreign Policy magazine and the New York Times. On Foreign Policy's internet site on June 3, 2009, he gave a forecast for humankind.
In a way, it was an answer to Time's question posed 1 decade ago: will we still eat meat?
Meat, the slavery of our time. How the coming vegetarian revolution will arrive by force, by Jim Ottavalli. I have a prediction. Sooner than you might think, this will be a vegetarian world. Future generations will find the idea of eating meat both morally absurd and logistically impossible. Going by the numbers, eating meat is pretty hard to justify for the even moderately health conscious. A National Cancer Institute report released last March found that people who ate the most red meat were, as the New York Times put it, most likely to die from cancer, heart disease and other causes. The biggest abstainers were least likely to die.
The environmental impact is also crystal clear and similarly appalling. By 2025, we simply won't have the resources to keep up the habit. The ethical issues will evolve too. In the way that slavery, once a broad social norm, later became an unthinkable crime, we can expect to see a similar shift once meat eating disappears from our planet. Perhaps someday the very idea of eating animal flesh will seem as remote as the idea of owning humans does now.
We salute all journalists and media groups who, through dedicated research, keen analysis and ability to communicate about meat and climate change, are helping to save the planet. May you be blessed in your noble role. To our viewers, we thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television for words of wisdom, coming up next after noteworthy news. May you and your loved ones be safe and content in heaven's care.
For more details, please visit www.suprememastertv.com/EE